Overlord Volume 7 Chapter 1. Chapter 1, Invitation to Death. Translated by Nigel. Proofreader, Editor, Deus Ex Machina. Part 1. Awentar, the imperial capital, lay in the western region of the Baharuth Empire. At its center was the imperial palace that was the residence of the man known as the Bloody Emperor, Jeknavrun Farlord El Nix. It was surrounded by universities, the Imperial Magical Academy and all manner of government buildings which radiated out from it, and it could be considered the heart of the empire. While its population was lower than that of the royal capital of the Riestais kingdom, it was larger in scope than the royal capital. In addition, several years of reform meant that the empire was currently in the middle of its greatest boom in history, with non-stop innovation and a steady stream of resources and human talents coming in. The old was being torn down to make way for a promising future, and the faces of the residents were bright. Ains and Nabaril walked through the heated, bustling city streets. Under normal circumstances, Ains would be gawking at everything as he walked, like a country bumpkin fresh from the farm. At the same time, he would have been deeply moved by how different this place was from the kingdom. However, those emotions were almost absent in Ains. The state of his heart was reflected in his actions, and his troubled steps. What ruled him now was the feeling of unhappiness. Coming to the Empire had been part of Demiurge's plan, and the more he thought about it, the more his eyebrows illusory, as they were knotted together. The concept of forbearance was completely unnecessary for Ain Zurgaon, the supreme ruler of Nazarick. Neither did he need to suppress his feelings of frustration. Ains's word was law, and as a leader, all he had to do was speak and black would become as white. By right, there was nothing which would not go as he wished. That being the case, why hadn't things ended up like this? That was because he wanted to reject Demiurge's proposal, but he could not, for various reasons. The objective of the plan demonstrate the power of Nazarick was simple enough to understand, and its effects would show themselves immediately. That said, Ains disliked it, because he felt that doing so would bring shame upon the handmade creations of his friends. It was quite unsightly to reject an excellent plan based on personal feelings alone, and he did not want the others to feel that he was an uncharitable person in his role as supreme leader. Besides, he had no other ideas to serve as an alternative. Objecting to someone's proposals with nothing else to replace them was essentially picking a fight with the other party. It was not Ains's status as a ruler but his experiences as a salaryman which told him this. Ains began muttering the words he had used to talk himself down several times already. I need to be calm. I need to cool my head. I need to be rational. If forced to choose between reason and emotion, a superior ought to select reason. The type who act on their emotions might be able to reap great rewards if they channel all their energies into their work, but for the most part it never ends well for them. Besides, it's already. The die has been cast. Ains had no lungs, but he still took a deep breath, and then exhaled. The surrounding citizens looked in puzzlement at this warrior who was suddenly sucking in and expelling the air as he walked, but they did not seem to mind. His imposing, heroic build often drew the stares of passers-by. In particular, it was even more common for others to look at him after he had been hailed as a hero. Therefore, he paid no heed to the gazes of others unless he was putting on a show, riding Hamsuke, or some other special circumstance came up. After repeating that cycle a few times, only a little bit of annoyance remained within him. That was when he noticed Nabaril, who was trailing behind him. Forgive me, I seem to have been walking a little too fast. Ains was a man, and the way he took large strides in armor was completely different from the way which the feminine Nabaril moved in her robe. After considering her physical attributes, she was probably not having too much difficulty, but as a man, he had to apologize for walking AEAD while only thinking of himself. Not at all, it is fine. Is that so? Was that her answer as a servant, or did she really not mind? Ains had no idea, so all he could do was shorten his stride while looking for something to talk about. He felt uncomfortable about the prickly air around him just now, and he racked his brains for some way to change the mood. However, he could not think of a suitable topic. Businessmen often use trivial matters like the weather and so on to get a conversation going. Discussing sports was not a bad idea either, but that required prior knowledge about which team the other party supported. As Ains pondered how to initiate the conversation, he suddenly went TCH in his heart. Why am I walking on eggshells around Nabaril, my own subordinate? This is a rare opportunity for me to roleplay how a master should talk to his servant. That said, what should a ruler or perhaps an absolute being talk to his subordinates about? Ains recalled his conversations with his bosses in daily life. Would those be appropriate? Ains was confused. He was the highest authority within the great underground tomb of Nazarick, not the director of an enterprise. Strictly speaking, he was closer to a company's president. No, president's not quite right. That said, what would the king of the kingdom say to Gazef Stronov? If only I could use that as a reference. That said, there was no point thinking about that now. Going on in silence like this made the mood too grim. Ains decided to throw caution to the wind and say the first thing which came to mind. Nabe, what do you think of this voice of mine? Ains tapped his vocal cords with his index finger, or to be precise, the place where his vocal cords should have been. He used a gauntleted hand to press on his throat. He should have felt nothing through the metal, but there was a sensation of squishiness instead. There was also a strangely out-of-place moistness there. I pray you will forgive my frankness, but I do not quite like that voice. It is not because it sounds strange, but because I find your usual voice to be quite marvelous, Morn-san. I understand that you have reasons which prevent you from doing so, but I cannot help but wish you would resume using your normal voice, Morn-san. Is that so? I think this voice has a magnetic quality to it, and sounds quite good. Neuronus selected it from among those of 50 people, so I feel it has a certain charm which cannot be put into words. Ains suddenly recalled what his own voice sounded like in a recording, and groaned quietly. However, his mood immediately restabilized. Is that so? I prefer your normal voice, Morn-san. Thank you, Nabe. However, now that I think about it, I did not expect that I could make use of this. There was no telling if Ains was speaking from the heart or merely rattling off pleasantries. As he thought, he poked his throat once more. He could feel the life form stuck there, a lit bug shifting around. Perhaps it might be ticklish if he were human. Did I just not know about it, or was it added in a later update? I can't say for sure that not knowing about this won't inconvenience me. It's not just my knowledge of this world which I need to check, but my own knowledge of YGGDRASIL as well. How troublesome. The game company wanted YGGDRASIL's players to be able to enjoy the feeling of exploring the unknown. They wanted their players to play around and experiment with all sorts of things, so the developers produced a staggering amount of game content, and included systems that could fine-tune that data. Thus, the unknown stretched out before the players. They did not provide any information about the game world's map, and they were also inconsiderate enough not to supply any news about the game's dungeons and things such as alming, food preparation, or the raising of magical beasts. In a world like this, one had to investigate and discover things on one's own. In fact, even the items that one could and could not use could only be felt out through repeated trial and error on the player's part. There were walkthrough sites and news sites, but those sites only hosted a compilation of publicly known information or very untrustworthy rumors. YGGDRASIL was a game of exploring the unknown. Thus, any information one uncovered would be very valuable. There was no merit in publishing this valuable information for any stranger to view free of charge. Ultimately, one could only rely on the information that one's guild had uncovered, or information traded from a reliable guild. Everything else was useless and worthless news. There had even been a period of time when people had left suspicious posts on message boards along the lines of, "I'm leaving my guild, so I'm going to reveal all my guild secrets now." Well, some of that information had been accurate. There had once been a guild called Three Burning Eyes. It was a guild formed by the master of a website who ran a paid membership information site. And they often practiced the bad habit of sending spies into high-level guilds to steal their information. However, the developers did not consider this a bad habit. They tacitly agreed that this was a valid means of gathering information. However, that did nothing to mollify the parties who had their information stolen. Those high-level guilds were utterly furious, so they formed an alliance and attacked Three Burning Eyes. The alliance stationed people at the respawn points within the temples of the city containing the guild's home base, then began PKing the guild members. They then proceed to repeatedly PK the guild members right after they respawned. Eventually, Three Burning Eyes collapsed and the guild members scattered to the winds. In the end, they published all their information for free onto the web. That had been a nostalgic memory. Well, there were no spies in Ainzulgaon. But if that incident had not happened, perhaps we might have had more members. That incident had caused Ainzulgaon to stop recruiting. With only 41 members, they were the least populous of the high-ranked guilds. Perhaps there might have been highly reliable websites in the last days of YGGDRASIL. However, Ains had only browsed those sites during the golden age of Ainzulgaon, when they had been in their full glory. At that time, there had been precious little useful information on those sites. My knowledge might have stagnated there. Granted, I did pay attention to the developer updates. There must surely be other YGGDRASIL players in this world other than myself. I need to consider the danger of losing to them in terms of knowledge. After bringing 8 Fingers under his banner, Ains had learned much about the region surrounding Nazarick. That included a great deal of information about the kingdom and the empire, which was currently being put to good use. However, there was very little information about the Holy Kingdom, the Theocracy and the Republic, so he would have to carefully gather information on those places in the future. Good grief, the more I think about it, the more worried I get. I wish I had a more cheerful topic to think about instead. Ains paused here, and then he casually glanced around. Speaking of which, the Empire really is quite lively. Is that so? It feels about the same as Rantal to me. After hearing Nabral's words, Ains looked around once more. The streets are filled with life and the people's eyes are gleaming. There is a certain ambience in the air, one which belongs to people who believe their lives are going to get better. As expected of Mornsan, Nabral said from a small distance behind him. However, Ains felt embarrassed by his own words and did not answer her. That was simply an impression he had gotten, and he was not confident in the accuracy of his assessment. Don't tell me I was infected by Pandora's actor. Ambience. I can't believe I could say something as pretentious as that without getting embarrassed. Did I think I was a poet or something? In the royal capital, he had need to act like a hero to some extent, Snanes had played the role of one. It would seem he had not fully gotten out of the part yet. The face under the closed helm turned red from mild embarrassment, although a skeletal face could not blush, and just then Ains saw the inn which Fluda had told him about before his eyes. This was the highest grade inn in the imperial capital, and even from a distance, one could tell it was more luxurious than Erantal's finest inn. If one considered the inns in the royal capital to have a long and distinguished history, then this inn of the imperial capital was a newly opened, high-end hotel, and the question of which inn was better would be decided by personal preference. Alright, we can't be sure until we go in to take a look, but I think we've got the right place. Ains briefly felt the adamantite rank plate dangling at his chest, and then headed for the inn's entrance. Much like in Erantal, the entrance was flanked by muscular guards in leather armor. The men cast suspicious glances at Morn and Nabe as they walked through the arch. Then, as they saw a certain item, their eyes suddenly went wide. Is that the real thing? It must be, given their gear. He could hear them whispering to each other. As Ains walked before the tense, nervous guards, they politely asked him in stiff tones, "Please forgive me if I offend you, adamantite-ranked adventurer Sama, but may I please see the proof of your identity?" Ains took off the plate and asked, "Does this inn not take walk-in customers?" "Yes. Unfortunately, in order to maintain the appropriate tone, our establishment does not accommodate guests who have not been previously introduced. But of course, you would be an exception, adamantite adventurer Sama." One of the guards wiped his hands on his clothes, bowed deeply, and then gingerly accepted the identity plate like it was something fragile. He then turned it over and read out the letters there. Morn. The Black Sama. Indeed. I have verified it and there is no doubt. Thank you for offering us the proof of your adamantite rank. Just like before, the guard carefully returned the plate to Ains. The plates which denoted an adventurer's rank were made out of the material corresponding to said rank, and this little piece of adamantite cost a tidy sum. Granted, adamantite was a very hard metal and it would not be scuffed or scratched just by dropping it on the ground, but if they misplaced it, they would have to pay out a hefty amount. For example, a Garan a crow-like bird might snatch it away from the side while it was being returned. This was not a fable concocted to remind them to be careful when handling valuable items. This was an actual example of what had happened in the past. After Ains took it back, the two guards looked visibly relieved, like a weight had been taken off their shoulders. Then, "May I come in?" "Of course, Morn Sama. Please allow me to escort you to the concierge." "I see. Then, by all means." The kingdom did not have the practice of tipping. Was it the same in the empire? Ains thought about things like that as he let the guard lead them on. After entering the inn, they passed through a lounge whose floor seemed to be made of large stone slabs before heading straight to the concierge. "I have with me the adamantite-ranked adventurer Morn Sama and his companion." The cultured-looking man seated at the counter glanced at the guard. The guard then bowed reverently to Ains before returning to his post. "I bid you welcome, Morn Sama. Please accept my sincerest thanks for choosing to reside at our humble establishment for the duration of your stay in the imperial capital." The man at the counter bowed deeply to Ains. "No, it's fine. I'll be staying here for a night." "Very well. Then, may I trouble you to sign our guest register?" Ains smiled under his closed helmet, then picked up the pen and wrote. His signature read, Morn, in the language of the kingdom. He had practiced writing it dozens of times. "Thank you very much. May I know what sort of room you would like?" Personally, Ains did not mind a cheap room. However, as usual, he could not do that. "I can't eat, so a room without meals would be fine." Ains recalled several dishes from this world. There was a green-colored fruit juice with a sweet fragrance. There was something pink which looked like scrambled eggs. There were also pieces of sliced meat covered in some kind of blue liquid. They all piqued his curiosity, but he could not eat them. Libido, appetite and the need to sleep. This body of mine has a lot of benefits, but I've lost a lot of things as well. What a shame. That said, if I still had my body of flesh, there's a high chance I might have lost myself in my desires. Ains imagined himself in bed with Albedo, and his face twisted slightly. That was because the mental image of a superior committing sexual harassment on a female employee or worse had appeared in his mind. Granted, Albedo does seem to love me. This is a complicated feeling. If only I hadn't done that back then. Oops. Pardon me, just give us an appropriate room. By the way, since we don't have the common trade currency, can we pay with kingdom coins? Of course. The kingdom's currency and the empire's currency has always been exchanged on a one-for-one basis. I see. Then we shall have to impose upon you. Very well, then we shall prepare a suitable room for you, Morn-sama. Could I trouble you to wait for a while in the lounge bar? Ains looked toward the bar in question. It was very spacious and gave off a very classy feeling, and it looked like it could seat around 50 people. The chairs looked like they would be very comfortable. A bard was performing quiet music in the background. The food and drinks there are free of charge, so please feel free to relax at your leisure. One received better service if one paid more. That much was the same in any world where one went. However, this service did not please Ains at all. Understood. Then, let's go, Nabe. Ains brought Nabe to the lounge bar and took a seat on a nearby chair. There were several other guests in the lounge, all of whom appeared to be adventurers. High-level adventurers would receive massive payments just for a single job, and their living standards would go up along to match. Living in an inn like this was hardly a problem for them. That was probably true for any city, be it the royal capital or Erantal. Ains checked to see that the adamantite plate around his neck was visible to others. Letting the other guests talk among themselves and build his reputation for him was a good idea too. Ains felt others look at him as he perused the drinks menu in front of him. I can't read this. He flipped through the pages at random. He went through the menu despite not being able to read it, in order to ward off suspicion. Ains had brought along the reading glasses he had lent to Sebas as a precaution, but he could not take his time using them here. Sebas. Suara, huh? He recalled the face of his subordinate, and quietly spoke the name of the woman whose name it called to mind. Has something happened to that woman? Ah, no, it's nothing important. I was just thinking about how she had adapted to all of this. While he had entrusted Sebas with Sue's care, Ains had promised her his protection, and as a business owner, he was obliged to pay attention to the well-being of his employees. I think they will be fine. Currently, the head maid is in confinement, so Sebas-sama is teaching her how to be a proper maid. After she learns the appropriate etiquette, she will be taught how to cook and how to perform other duties. Once we have determined what duties suit her, she will be officially assigned a position. I see. Very well, it should be fine handing the matter to Sebas. Also, I think it's about time we release those two from confinement. Albedo's anger should have cooled by now. Nabril did not answer. All she did was nod her head. Sensing a lull in their conversation, the waiter approached them. Have you decided what you wish to order? I'd like an iced macchiato. Nabril? The same for me. Pick what you want to drink. It's fine. No, I do want the same thing. More milk in mine, please. Very well. The waiter bowed deeply, and then retreated in silence. Macchiato was a drink Ains had commonly seen in Oriental's inns, and it looked like a latte coffee. The smell was reminiscent of a latte as well, but Ains had also seen separate latte and regular coffees. Incidentally, Ains had no idea what it tasted like. It went without saying that he could not drink it. He had tried, of course, but it had all leaked out through the bottom of his chin, and he had not been able to taste anything. However, he ended up ordering it anyway, because it looked like something which only high-class establishments would sell. He felt that it suited places like these. As Ains wiped away his non-existent sweat, Ains asked Nabrul a question in a matter-of-fact way. "Nabe, what does macchiato taste like?" He had asked her because he knew she had drunk it before. Nabrul paused to think. This was probably the sort of look one would have on their face if they were thinking about how to explain the taste of coffee to someone else. "How shall I put this? It is very much like a cafe shakerato. However, it tastes of condensed milk, so I do not quite like it." "Is that so? That sounds delicious. Shakerato. I've never heard of a drink like that before. It might also be a beverage unique to this world. I feel it is merely passable." Ains casually responded, and then the drinks came. "Don't mind me, just help yourself. It would be strange if both of us didn't touch our drinks." He had grown used to not removing his helmet in the kingdom, and so Ains had completely forgotten to take it off when the drinks came. The way he said so in such a natural way felt very unnatural. "Thank you very much. Drink, then, and listen to me as you do. I plan to spend 2 days seeing the sights of the imperial capital. I hear that the central markets have a wide variety of stock, and just browsing them is quite interesting. Then, there's the northern markets, which seem to contain a majority of shops stocking magic items. Adventurers go there regularly." That information had been provided by Eight Fingers, who were now under Ains's thumb. They had also supplied a lot of news about the underworld, but Ains had no intention of getting involved in such matters, so he had only skimmed that information. "We'll proceed to the Adventurers Guild on the 3rd day. I'd like to meet and get to know the Empire's adamantite-ranked adventurers, but if that's not possible, we'll just take a simple, quickly completed task to spread our fame. If all goes as planned, we will be able to leave within 7 days. Do you have any suggestions?" Nabrul, who had not touched her drink but was only listening in silence, simply shook her head.